Good Friday afternoon, everyone, and welcome in to yet another pre-recorded edition of your weekly Friday presentation of the chat. Alan Fitz, your host here for this afternoon's program, and again, welcome in to the show. Well, we're going to talk about something a little bit different this afternoon than what I normally talk about. And it has brought the attention of cause of concern to a lot of media outlets out there across the country. And this is being, I'm sure if you keep up with the news, you've already read this. But for those of you that haven't, the Trump administration up at the White House in Washington, D.C., have made some comments that they want to change the law, so to speak, and allow convicted felons the ability to exercise the Second Amendment right, the right to keep and bear arms. Now, there is already a law in place for this. It's called the Lautenberg Amendment, and we're going to get into that here in a little bit. We're also going to get into some Texas laws that allow felons in Texas to already be in possession of a firearm. For those of you that may not know that, we're going to also go into that into detail as well. But let's start off this afternoon talking about felons in firearms. Now, you know, folks, I'm here to tell you right now, it does not matter how many laws that Washington, D.C. can pass on the federal level, and it doesn't matter how many laws each state capital can pass for their respective state. You're not going to stop this process, okay? Felons have always been able to acquire firearms. And I think everybody knows that. It's basically an underground, if you will, operation that has gone on since, well, basically since the beginning of time, when laws were in place to ban convicted felons from carrying firearms. So, the Second Amendment to the United States Constitution does guarantee that all American citizens have the right to keep and bear arms in this country, with the exception of course, convicted felons, and in some cases, domestic violence convictions on the misdemeanor level can also forbid this. And we're going to get a little bit into that more into the show at a little bit later time. President Donald Trump and his administration are looking at the possibility of trying to go in and say, you know what, every American in this country, no matter what they've done, has the right to exercise their Second Constitutional Amendment rights. But can this be done? Is this something that really needs to be done? I mean, folks, we've got people right now locked away in maximum security prisons that used weapons in the commission of crimes, aggravated crimes, aggravated assault crimes with deadly weapons. And it seems like President Donald Trump is going to go down in history as the pardoning president. You know, he's pardoned just about everybody that can be pardoned that has got into some kind of problem that he likes. Of course, if he don't like you, he's not going to pardon you. But in this case, yes, Trump is becoming what is known as the pardoning president of our country. And now he is turning to a situation that may or may not be a good idea by actually pardoning, if that's what can be done, all of these people that have convicted felony records, which theoretically, in my opinion, I don't think this is possible. I mean, you'd have to go back basically to the early ages, and he doesn't have enough time left in the presidency to do that. And I think the president knows that. So they're looking at Section 922, paragraph G in the federal codes of the United States. And this brings us to what is called the Lautenberg Amendment. Now, a lot of you baby boomers out there may not even know what I'm talking about. But for some of you people out there that really keep up with what's going on in Washington, D.C., and a lot of the federal statutes out there, you're going to know exactly what I'm talking about. And the Lautenberg Amendment is what actually prohibits certain people convicted of a certain particular crime from not only possessing firearms, but it also prohibits them from even possessing ammunition to any weapon, even in their own home. Yes, we're talking about the Lautenberg Amendment. And for those of you that are not familiar with this, let me bring you up to snuff on exactly what this amendment is. Back in 1967, a New Jersey senator by the name of Frank Lautenberg proposed what was called the Gun Control Act, which passed in 1968. Now, before I get into hard details about the Gun Control Act, this was originally sought after by Lautenberg to ban people convicted, of misdemeanor domestic family violence from possessing weapons. Now, it took him many, many years to get this passed. It didn't happen overnight. But what did happen was the Gun Control Act of 1968, and I'm going to tell you how this got started. Back in the 1960s, the Vietnam War was ongoing. The United States was involved in the Vietnam War. Basically, a war that we could not win. I mean, it boiled down to the point that soldiers were over in that area. And a little boy, we'll take this as an example, and this actually did happen back in this time era. Little boy was riding a bicycle along the streets of Hanoi, the capital of present-day Vietnam, or Vietnam, whichever way you prefer to say it. And there was a soldier that was, say, standing on a street corner. And this little boy drove up on a bicycle, and it had a basket in front of the handlebars. And he had what appeared to be a small paper bag full of some type of grocery goods. The soldier didn't really pay attention to it. And when the boy got off the bicycle and used the kickstand, he grabbed the sack of groceries, and what the soldier didn't realize was happening at that time is he pulled a pin on a 4-second grenade. And 4 seconds later, bicycle, soldier, and anything in the immediate area was gone. Shrapnel flying. The Gun Control Act of 1968 was originally set in place and passed to ban firearm transfers across state lines, with the exception made to licensed firearm makers. Now, let me get back a little bit about Vietnam. Senator Lautenberg originally at that time attempted to introduce a bill into federal legislation to ban Vietnam War veterans coming back into this country to their wives after the war was over. Why was this happening? Well, to put it in pine blank, straight up terms, some of these soldiers were what is known today as PTSD. Now, you got to understand that back in the 1960s, nobody knew what PTSD was. So these Vietnam soldiers were coming back home to the United States, basically some severely shell-shocked from being in the Vietnam War, out in the stagnant water of some of the jungles, and basically were committing family violence against their spouse. I mean, there were even reports that some of them beat the hell out of their wives so bad they killed them. And it became widespread back in the late 1960s. And what Senator Lautenberg was attempting to do was to stop them from possessing weapons, because a lot of these soldiers that came back and did this, charges were filed against them for basically domestic violence. I mean, it was already on the books. But Senator Lautenberg from New Jersey was unable to draft a bill in time to go through the 1968 passage. What he did get was, again, that Gun Control Act was passed. And for those of you tuning in a little bit late, what that Gun Control Act was of 1968 was to ban firearm transfers across state lines, with the exception made to licensed firearm makers. Basically, folks, what was happening is not all states were allowing manufactured transfer back during the ending of the Vietnam War. So a lot of these soldiers, believe this or not, were traveling out of state, buying firearms, and using interstate commerce to bring them back across the state line to their home state. Now, this just wasn't in Texas. This was widespread across the United States. And those weapons were being used for the purpose of what is known today as domestic violence. Texas calls it assault family violence in today's penal code language. In the state of Louisiana, they call it, well, there's actually two laws on the books that we did research. There's simple assault, and then there's domestic abuse battery. Firearms were being used in the commission of crimes. It's called something else in Oklahoma. It's called something else in Arkansas. It's called something else in Missouri. It still goes down to domestic violence. So, the Gun Control Act of 1968 curbed some of that transfer of firearms across state lines to be used for the purpose of crimes in their home state and amongst the Domestic Violence Act using those weapons. A lot of wives out there were shot and killed by their husbands coming back from the Vietnam War. Senator Lautenberg of New Jersey did not give up at that point in time. He continued on and on and on to push this bill through federal legislation, which failed multiple times because there just wasn't enough cases on record to say we've got a problem. As time went on, folks, domestic violence became more prevalent in the early to mid 80s. Then it became a real issue in the late 80s. Matter of fact, it got so bad that states were passing laws left and right and just could not seem to put a dent in anything. So what Senator Lautenberg did is he attempted once again to pass this through legislation on the federal level. And on September the 30th of 1996, the second bill of the Lautenberg Amendment kicked into law, which bans anyone in the United States of America that has been convicted on the misdemeanor level of domestic violence from possessing firearms or ammunition at any given time, any given place. Even in their home, they cannot legally possess firearms or live ammunition. Now, there's some exceptions made here in Texas on this, and I'll get into that before I close out the program. Did this stop the felons from getting firearms? No, in no way. And it's still today, still in effect, still will not prevent convicted felons from harboring firearms. Now, here in Texas, and you heard me mention this at the beginning of the show, that a convicted felon in Texas can legally be in possession of a firearm. And I'm going to get into this with you momentarily. I will tell you right now that a convicted felon in Texas can vote as long as they're not on parole or active probation status. So how does a convicted felon in the state of Texas legally acquire and possess a firearm? Well, they can't acquire it through a license. They call them an FFL, a Federal Firearm License Dealer. They can't get it through them because of the Brady Act. Now, this happened when President Ronald Reagan was shot back in 1981, and the Brady Act was passed due to the fact one of the Secret Service agents, you all know this story, last name was Brady, shielded the president from the man that was so obsessed with Jodie Foster, he just decided he would kill Reagan to try to impress Jodie Foster. Well, that didn't work, but the Brady Act was passed, which, unless the law has changed, and we really didn't go into detail or try to look that up, there's like a 5 to 10 day waiting period or something like that to run a federal background check, go through Interpol, the whole 9 yards, to make sure that person's not a convicted felon. John Hinckley Jr. is the man that attempted to assassinate the late now President Ronald Reagan back in 1981. Texas Penal Code Section 46.04. I'll give you a second to get a pen and a piece of paper to write that down. That's Texas Penal Code Section 46.04 states that a person that has been convicted of a felony may possess a firearm either at his residence or property under his control 5 years after the release of probation, parole, community supervision, in layman's terms, it's got to be off paper. This applies to men and women alike. is still a violation of federal law under the Lautenberg Amendment if the person was convicted of domestic violence in Texas. Now, there's also a stipulation to that rule as well. Prior to doing the show this afternoon by recording, I did not take the time to look up that penal code section. But it does specifically state in black and white the same language. A person that's been convicted of domestic violence in the state of Texas, misdemeanor domestic violence. Now, that's a Class A misdemeanor. That is a one-time occurrence only. You get one time. As long as it's not in an aggravated statute, it's just domestic violence. You pushed him, he pushed you, knocked you down on the floor, something like that, constitutes domestic violence in Texas. So, you get that on your record, then it's a misdemeanor Class A, which means the Lautenberg Amendment now takes over on the federal level. Now, this also applies to even people in a dating relationship or those that have broke up out of a relationship up to 12 months. You can still be charged with domestic violence, but that's a different show. So, 5 years, according to Penal Code 46.04 here in Texas, 5 years after you're off, yes, convicted felon may possess a firearm at home. Why is this law on the books in Texas? I'm going to tell you why. That law was passed many, many years ago in Austin to give the felons the right to protect themselves in Texas in case of a home invasion. So it goes back, if the felons are allowed to protect themselves from a home invasion, which makes sense. I mean, yeah, somebody breaks in your home, you need to be able to protect yourself. It's your life that you're protecting. It's your family's life you're protecting. Maybe your pet's life. So that law was passed to allow them, the convicted felons, whether or not they also were convicted of misdemeanor domestic violence, to protect themselves at home. Now, this doesn't mean that you walk out to your mailbox as a convicted felon and you step on a public street open carrying a firearm. Now you're a felon in possession of a firearm. That's going to go through the federal courthouse. You're going to be going to the penitentiary again for that. Own your property. And again, I want to stress, this means 5 years off paper. Okay? In other words, you get out of the penitentiary, you got to wait 5 years. You're on, say, probation for domestic violence. You get off probation in, say, 2026. Well, you've got to wait exactly 5 calendar days to, say, 2031 before you can have a firearm in your home. If you get caught with it before the 5-year anniversary, it's felon in possession of a firearm. So going back to the Trump administration, if convicted felons are already allowed in Texas and probably plenty of other states, allowed possession of a firearm inside their home with live ammunition, why not overturn Lautenberg? I don't think that it would 100% be overturned, because, folks, you have to realize something here when it comes to 922 paragraph G of the Lautenberg Amendment Federal Code. Do we need to modify Lautenberg, or do we need to completely dissolve Lautenberg? The answer to that question would be to amend Lautenberg. I think what you're going to see happen with this, and this is my professional opinion on the chat this afternoon, is take those people that are convicted felons. Now, we're not talking about anybody convicted of a gun crime. We're talking about people that have just been, say felony DWI. Your third DWI conviction in Texas is automatically a felony, okay? Some non-violent felony offense. Maybe felony hot checks. Somebody that goes out and commits theft up on the felony levels. Or maybe a felony drug conviction. Possession of cocaine or something like that. And it's been 10 years. And these folks have not even had as much as a parking ticket placed upon their criminal record. Yes, allow those people to apply for clemency. Allow those people to apply for a pardon. Would it become automatic? I don't think you're going to see that happen because they're going to have to go through some type of process. Can't just release every Tom, Dick, and Harry's conviction off. But you take a situation like that, where it's a non-violent crime, they haven't had any convictions, again, not as much as even a parking ticket placed upon their criminal record, no speeding tickets, no nothing. Yes, those people, I feel, should have the option of saying, hey, I want to get this off my record, I qualify for it, set it aside, dissolve it, discharge it, whatever they're going to do, and give those people the right to exercise, once again, their right to bear arms in this country. Now, you also have to look, folks, at this situation, and this scenario is way different. You have somebody that has spent time in prison for racketeering with violence convictions, or somebody that has been convicted of a very high felony as a result of violence with guns. Do we, as an American people, allow these people to have that felony removed from their record? Yes, I honestly believe there are some people out there that really get the picture, and they don't meet the definition of insanity. And I really think this is where the federal government has to be very careful, or especially the Trump administration, in granting clemency to these people. You take somebody that has been out of the penitentiary, say for 20 years, haven't had any brushes with the law unless it's something minor, maybe a state trooper with a speeding ticket, or, really, really minor, didn't put a quarter or a nickel in the parking meter in downtown Amarillo. Something like that, that's nothing. But you take somebody that has got some very severe convictions due to the fact that they committed violent crimes with guns, with weaponry. This is where you're going to have to really use caution in granting clemency to these people. Because, like I said earlier, there are some people out there that do not meet the definition of insanity. And I'm going to tell you what the definition of insanity is. The definition of insanity is when you go out and commit a crime over and over and over, but you're expecting different results to happen, different consequences, when in fact the same consequence keeps occurring. You keep getting thrown in jail for doing what you're doing over and over and over. repeat offenders. That is the definition of insanity. So you have to watch this. The Trump administration, in attempting to modify the Lautenberg Amendment, is going to have to be very cautious with something like this, because you take somebody that does not meet the definition of insanity. They don't qualify for it. Maybe it's a one-time thing that they got into. Maybe a first-degree felony. They spent 10, maybe 20 years in prison because of gun violence offenses. But 10, 15, 20 years later, they don't even have as much as a parking ticket or a speeding ticket on their record. Are they rehabilitated? Well, in most cases, yes, they learned their lesson. But if you take somebody that's a repeat offender over and over and over, and they keep committing these serious felony crimes with guns, racketeering, or whatever they're doing, murders, whatever, no. The Trump administration needs to leave that alone, because those people are learning the definition of insanity. They're not learning anything. What do you think out there? Do you think the Lautenberg Amendment should be modified from way back now, September of 1996? We're talking, folks, almost 40 years have gone by. 39 to be exact. Should this be modified under the Trump administration? Think about it. Look it up on a search engine. The Lautenberg Amendment. You be the judge of whether President Donald Trump's administration is doing the right thing, or is he doing the wrong thing for those people convicted of violent gun crimes in this country. You be the judge yourself. And that'll wrap it up for this Friday afternoon edition of The Chat. Again, thank you for tuning in to the program. We'll be back next Friday with a new topic. Until then, as always, have a great weekend. And this is Alan Fitz saying bye for now.